My name is Esther Figueroa, and I've organized this discussion about the aluminum industry in Jamaica, a discussion I think we very much need to have, and glad that you're going to participate. It's just a conversation, it's not an academic presentation or anything like that, it's very simple. I will introduce the panelists, they will give a little summary from their point of view, and then I'll ask them some leading questions. And then the audience will be part of the conversation. So the first panel is the social, health, and environmental impacts of the aluminum industry in Jamaica. And we have 3 panelists. I'm going to start with the one in the middle. Dr. Patrice Charles holds a doctorate in public health with a specialty in environmental health management. Her groundbreaking dissertation researched respiratory illnesses associated with bauxite mining and alumina refining in selected communities in Clarendon. And if you were here for my film, you will see that she's a central part of my film. Patrice is the founder and lead counseling psychologist at the Phoenix Counseling Center. To my immediate left is Dana McCauley, who is an award-winning writer of short stories, novels, creative nonfiction, and journalism. She's also one of Jamaica's best-known environmentalists, one of the founders of the Jamaica Environmental Trust in 1991, and recently stepped down as CEO in 2017. She has recently been researching and writing policy papers for Capri. The one she's currently working on is about the city of Kingston, Jamaica. Is that true? Great. All right. Our third panelist is Rachel Allen. She's an environmental scientist whose most current environmental focus is climate change. Rachel was most recently at the World Bank, where she managed the $1.2 billion Global Climate Fund and had responsibility for 26 countries in the Caribbean Pacific region. She grew up in bauxite mining community in Manchester. She worked in the environmental division of Alcan and is intimately knowledgeable of the aluminum industry in Jamaica. So each panel starts, as I mentioned, with the panelists just giving a short summary of whatever it is they feel like saying on the topic. So, Patrice, please start.
Thank you, Esther, for having me. Good afternoon, everyone. So as Esther mentioned, my thesis, which was a very long time ago, 21 years ago, and yeah, and that's the point. 21 years ago, when I thought that such an important topic of how bauxite is affecting the communities, the health of the residents in the communities surrounding the bauxite factory, and I looked at between 1 to 10 miles from the bauxite factory, 21 years ago. And just to give you a brief background to my thesis, it was investigating the relationship of the levels of particulate matter, both PM10 and PM2.5, and the prevalence of respiratory illnesses within communities that we believed were exposed to industrial pollutants, and of course, that industrial pollutant was coming from the bauxite factory. The communities represented urban, rural, industrialized, and non-industrialized areas. And the monitoring of air quality, health assessments of the individuals in the study, and the relationship between health and the environment were also investigated. So in order to investigate the relationship of the environment to health within the communities located within 1 to 10 miles of the bauxite factory, and which were exposed to those industrial emissions, I also had to examine the ambient air quality in order to determine the levels of contaminants in the area under study and whether they were related to the processing of bauxite. And of course, in order to, figure out if it was related, we had to analyze the particulate matter that was collected on the filters. So no one could say it was guessing that it was related to the bauxite factory. No, we actually found the alumina and the byproducts of bauxite processing. I also examined the prevalence of respiratory illnesses in communities relative to the bauxite factory. And I also examined the relationship between the airborne contaminants and the respiratory complaints. I looked at 8 randomly selected districts, and that yielded 1,590 adults and 969 children. The air quality monitoring of the area determined that PM10 and PM2.5 were the prominent air pollutants, and the PM10 year-round average was at its highest levels between miles 1 and 6 from the bauxite factory, and PM2.5 was at its highest between miles 1 and 3, and then it jumped at mile 10. And that puzzled everyone. But guess what? Mile 10 was in the middle of a rural agriculture area that did what? Burned sugarcane. So that's why, which made it even more accurate. So the higher levels of particulate matter occurred during the summer periods. And why was that? Less rainfall. PM10 found closest to the factory consisted mainly of aluminum, sodium, and calcium. The study also showed that adults within 6 miles of the bauxite factory had higher levels of sinusitis, allergies, and asthma. And we had numerous questionnaires. We had a medical questionnaire. We did both qualitative and quantitative analysis. And we traveled with a medical doctor. We looked at, it was, I'm not going to get into the details of the study, but it was very difficult to question the validity of the medical checks of the study. So the adults had higher levels of sinusitis, allergies, and asthma. And the children within the same area also showed higher rates of sinusitis and allergies, but we couldn't really establish a relationship with asthma in the children. Overall, the results suggested that particulate matter associated with bauxite mining may have significant negative impacts in the health of persons in the communities residing closer to the factory that were exposed to unacceptable levels of PM10 and 2.5. So what this study did was to provide important information of the potential risk factors for respiratory illnesses for communities that were exposed to industrial pollutants. And as I mentioned, 21 years ago, I recommended that the economic need of the country, which of course cannot be argued, it is definitely essential and important, but it should be considered along with the health and well-being of the people. The sustainable development should include consideration for the comfort, physical security, and health of the people. And what I recommend, and I'm still recommending 21 years later, is that a public health approach to environmental protection is highly feasible and highly desirable. It's an efficient and effective public health tracking system for the ongoing collection, integration, analysis, and interpretation of data is necessary. And I'm not speaking about reacting to something and you're going to put up an air quality monitor just to see what's there when the damage is already done. I mean consistently tracking data in regards to the environmental hazards, exposure to environmental hazards, and the health effects potentially related to exposure to the environmental hazards. And the ultimate goal of the environmental public health tracking system is to protect communities by providing information to both local and international agencies who will in turn use the information to plan, apply, and evaluate public health actions to prevent and control environmental related diseases. Back then, there weren't any systems at the national level to track many of the exposures and health effects that may be related to environmental hazards. In addition, in most cases, existing environmental hazards, exposure, and disease tracking systems were not linked and is still not linked together, which results in a system that is difficult to study and monitor the relationships mentioned. So despite many public statements at the highest level assuring commitment to environmental protection and sustainability, the Jamaican government still needs to operationalize their promises. And I know, because we met with Minister Baz at the Capri Reveal, and he has acknowledged, and he has also given his word that he's working on uniting the government agencies and putting together the appropriate policies to empower them to do what it is that they really need to do. It has long been recognized that the weakness of the environmental, regulatory, and institutional framework is a primary obstacle to good environmental stewardship. So I'm hoping that with those words and his promises that we're actually going to be in a new place very soon in regards to environmental protection and the health of our communities. Thank you.
Velocity. Dana? So Esther's film, I think, made a call not just to our minds, but to our hearts. And so I want to talk to you personally about just two small anecdotes about my own journey as it relates to bauxite. And the first one comes when I was a young adult, long before my environmental life, and was contemplating and in fact did migrate. It was the shortest migration on record, lasted less than 3 weeks. This is true. And when I arrived back home and we fell into a pothole outside the airport, I insisted the car be stopped because I was so happy to have fallen into the pothole. But the reason I tell that story is because I was then, and this is again before my sort of environmental awakening, if I can call it that, I had to make this decision about what to take with me to this new country that I thought I would not return from except as a visitor. And one of the things I took with me to Canada, which was where we went, was a picture of the Yorton Mud Lake, which we used to see on the drive going to the North Coast. And my parents would point out with some pride in their voice that that was the Mud Lake. And I thought it was visually beautiful. It was this rich red color and surrounded by this forest. And so I got a photograph of it, blew up the photograph in the way one did in those days, and took it with me to Canada. And I tell that story because I think it points to the way we have become just desensitized to what's around us, and we don't see it anymore. I did not see it as a young adult, and it had to be explained to me much later that this image that I thought was worthy of being on my wall in a foreign country was in fact toxic waste. And when I drive around Jamaica with visitors and sometimes with Jamaicans, they're looking at things and saying, isn't that marvelous? And I'm looking at things and going, well, no, it's not, it's awful, that's terrible. And I think that's part of what Esther was showing us as well, and with some of her big drone footage, that we've gotten used to what bauxite has done to Jamaica, and we don't see it anymore. My second story is after, JET had been formed and I finally left my job and was doing it full time. And it was surrounding one of the expansions of Jamalco. And for the first time, we were contacted by the communities around Jamalco. At that point, JET had not done much community work. We had mostly been concentrated in schools. And we were contacted by the community around Jamaica who were worried about the expansion and its impact on their public health. And so I went to there was going to be a public consultation and then the EIA assessment, but I went alone to a sort of consultation with the community before the actual formal process, just to really learn, to find out what were their concerns and so forth, right? So they explained that, they get this check for dust nuisance. So I go, what do you mean dust nuisance? And they say, well, if you live within a certain area, a certain distance from the bauxite plant, you just get a money every month. And that's to compensate you for the dust. So this struck me as being outrageous, but the people did not seem particularly concerned about that. And really, their concern was with expansion, was that radius going to be expanded so that more people would get dust nuisance. So in the discussion now about what their concerns were, which were described by Esther in her film, noise, pollution, displacement, loss of agricultural land, someone put up their hand and asked me,
And I'm running through the things that can be done, you know, the legal things, the protesting, the letters, the meeting the regulators, making a good turnout at the public meeting that we knew was coming. And so this man says, so if we were successful, what could happen? And I, very naively, say, the plant could be closed. And there was a deathly silence in the room, right? No one said anything else. And the meeting kind of broke up. And it was only later that I'm thinking about it and trying to process this confusing event that I realized that the people were absolutely dependent on the income from the factory. And so we had them in this trap of them having to choose between their lives, their health, and their livelihoods. And I think if there have been a few moments in my time at JET that just sort of galvanized me and made me feel, in what universe is this okay? And that was one of them. Because it does seem to me it was obscene that anyone could be asked to make that choice between eating, rent, electricity, school fees, water, transport, all the things we all need, and our health and the health of our children.
Too true. Rich?
Hello? Okay. Hi. Good morning, everyone. Or afternoon now, right? Esther, the movie this morning really cut me to the core in many different ways. I think the public defender I sat beside her was going to ask her to please move from beside her because I started crying at one point in time. Dr. Charles, I think I'm an indicator species. I wasn't included in your study, but as a young girl, I grew up right above the Redwood Lake, and my grandparents lived in a community near there. So when I was with my parents, or summertime with my grandparents, I was exposed. But I grew up thinking it was normal to have red, itchy eyes and constantly be sneezing, constantly being waking up, and sometimes being late for school. If it was some evenings, I remember, Benadryl can make you sleepy, then thinking, it's just an allergy. All different things. But as I got older, I would sit, I remember, as Dana, there are things that will stick out on you, and there are some things that propelled me to becoming an environmental scientist. And my dad, I was sitting on the veranda deck with him, and we're looking out, and of course the vista is the Redwood Lake, and I saw the plumes. And it was a day where I was really agitated, like sneezing and just really agitated. And I said, I bet you it's those, am I allowed to swear?
Yes.
Beep! Stacks that are causing this. And he looked at me and he said, and what are you going to do about it? And I thought, what do you mean, what am I going to do about it? He said, pen and paper. So I flipped open back then, it was Google directory. Alcan 962, remember the day, the number. And I called them and I demanded to speak to whoever is in charge of the plumes. And I demanded this, and it must have been like, is this some kid playing a prank? Anyways, long story short is, nothing really happened, of course. And I went on, and as a teenager, I started college. And in the summers, I would work, guess where? Alcan. My major was environmental science, so I worked in the environmental science division. So of course I did water quality monitoring and everything, and I got real insight, so this is why this has happened all this time. But to fast forward, I returned to Jamaica. I went away, studied, came back again. And then I worked with an environmental engineering firm that was contracted to do water quality analysis of the aquifer to calculate dilution factors of caustic soda and discharges. So you can imagine now my first real professional, every which way I'm just like, man, this thing is really hitting me every which way. I'm connected, but not necessarily in a positive way. So I started to have some conflict. Do I want to continue? I mean, you're young, you're out of school, this is your first job, everybody's like, wow, you work with that firm, nice and cool, but I remember sitting and saying to my dad once, I feel torn, like almost like something, you feel torn. I know everybody here has felt torn at some point in time. Again, in his wisdom, he said to me, so what are you going to do about it? What do you mean? I have bills to pay, I just started. Never said anything further. Fast forward about a month in, I was really torn one evening where I was just like, I cannot do this anymore. This is just a total conflict of my moral compass. And after all that has happened to me and my experiences to that point in time, I can't do this anymore. And just then the phone rang and it was my dad. And the only thing he said to me was, I just wanted to tell you something. And I'm like, maybe he's going to tell me now what to do, right? And he says, your room is still here at home and the fridge has a lot of food in it. I resigned the next day. So just to wrap up and say, the other dimension now, which is the flip side of, I guess, what I'm here to, is in terms of climate change. There's a whole dimension of climate change, and I guess you might get into that further down, Esther. So let me just end with that in terms of my introduction to the whole bauxite industry.
Thank you. And you can tell that Rachel is not, her lungs aren't so good at the moment. Directly related to her exposure these many years.
I'm so sorry. It would be remiss of me to not mention this part, the family connection. If you walk up to me and look closely, you'll see my throat has a big scar around it. Well, I did threaten the doctor at the time that if he made it too big, he would have to give me a diamond bling choker. So he was very careful and gave me a very thin line. What propelled me, why I was also conflicted, is one by one in my family, everyone started to have thyroid cancer. My friend's father died of cancer of the sinuses. My 3 friends at school had the same thing. Then my uncle died of cancer of the thyroid. I did write to, yeah. So what happened though was, I wrote to, this is after now I resigned and I started to work elsewhere. But this started to happen and I wrote now directly to Canada, demanding that something be done because this is not normal. And I remembered getting a phone call, and we didn't have mobile phones in those days, from someone in Canada to speak to me to say that they've investigated it and it was due to the high cadmium levels in the soil in Manchester. And I remembered, without any kind of scientific data or anything, I got into rebel mode. And I said, so you mean to tell me that there's a high, there's cadmium within a 10-mile radius only of the plant? What happened to a 20-mile radius? Why people in a 20-mile radius don't have this? And of course, it was shut down. But as we sit here, the little part of my thyroid that was left on actually has to now be also removed. So it's not normal. I don't think it's normal. And if you go to Williams Field, if you talk to many of the persons who grew up there when it was active, there are many of us you'll see actually with this scar around our neck. So I don't know. I have no scientific data to say it is or it isn't, but I can attest to the fact that I'm not too sure it's the cadmium in the soil.
Thank you. So we have a personal We have a personal example of the impacts. We have research. And Patrice, it was a long time ago, but I recall that the reaction to your groundbreaking study was not exactly embracing. In fact, the government and the industry savaged you. Your methodology, your findings, blah, blah, blah. Well, the whole thing. So instead of saying yes, we have a problem, let us study it carefully, let us from this point onward collect data, let us be comprehensive. Instead it was to shoot the messenger.
Yeah, and I took that as an indicator that I was actually on the right track.
Of course.
So what I did was I took a break from my thesis for about 1-2 years. Had a baby, came back and said, all right, I'm an environmental scientist, so I went and worked for the government. Jumped right in as their lead environmental health scientist at Ministry of Health, and took my proposal to them. I was the one that purchased the air quality instruments for the government. And so I got right back into my thesis, but was very smart. I was very quiet about it. Got a team together. Government sponsored the driver. We went out, medical doctor, everything went in. They had no idea that I was in there. The community was quiet about it because when I just started up, when they found out they cut off their water, I mean, they'll deny it, but trust me, they cut off their water supply. So after I took that break and they just thought that I wasn't coming back, when I went back in, they were quiet, we got our answers. By the time they figured out what it was, I had already collected all of my data for the year. It really didn't matter. And that's how I got it.
Right, so you mentioned Minister Vaz and his promises. So from a public health management perspective, what are some of the specifics that you think need to be happening so that we're tracking everything, we're collecting the data, moving forward? We have Rachel's story, we have everyone, test everybody blood, whatever needs to, give me some specifics from your perspective, what needs to happen.
From the government perspective, I think they need to organize, literally sort out the roles and responsibilities of their government agencies, first and foremost. They need to empower those government agencies to do what they're supposed to do. So NEPA, NRCA, all of those government agencies that are supposed to be, yes. They are supposed to be standalone agencies that are working for the people of Jamaica. And they are supposed to be looking at, they're the ones that are supposed to be overseen and in partnership with Ministry of Health, putting together this public health tracking system. But first and foremost, they need to know what they're supposed to be doing. And then they need to be empowered, in other words, given the correct resources, the right resources to do what they're supposed to be doing. They need to be enforcing the law. So, let me give an example. When I did this, between 1994 and 2001, there were 85 exceedances of the air quality standards in the area. 85, And 53 of them occurred at just one station. Now, how do you let that happen? I mean, okay, you let one slide. You like 2 slides. Let's just say, Lord, you make 3 slides. But 53? So the question really is, who is looking out? And if you know that this is happening, then what do you do? What fine is in place? Is the company just allowed to say, oh, I'm sorry, get a slap on the wrist and they continue? You can't say you're going to monitor air quality and you don't go out and change the filters. You don't go out every day and check to see if the machine is working. And you can't monitor air quality by just turning on a machine when the community protests, just to see what the levels are at that point in time. So there needs to be consistent and efficient monitoring, especially in these areas. Now, my study isn't the only one. There was a study prior to that in a different area, but it also looked at the ambient air quality. It was the one that indicated the exceedances of the bauxite factory. So there is data there that is still relevant in 2019 that the government can use, not just around bauxite factory, but even around Riverton, around industrial activity, that they can set up specific areas for monitoring. So you don't have enough financial support to do everywhere, then look at the 10-mile radius around industrial activity.
Okay, great. Dana, I know that you and Jet have been involved in justice issue as well, and you've also sat on the NRC board and interacted and blah, blah, blah. From what Patrice has been saying, how do you see these issues of agencies, monitoring, enforcement, all of that?
So I think one of the big problems is what is called an enforcement action. So if Mr. Knight was in this audience, or Mr. Landon Walker, current chairman of the NRC, he would vigorously dispute any contention that there has been no enforcement action on the bauxite companies. And if you dig into that, though, which is something Jet has done, what he means by enforcement action is anything that they have done in the face of an exceedance. So that could be a letter, it could be an enforcement notice, it could be a meeting that you've been called to, it could be a warning notice, it could be these range of what I call soft actions that they would both vigorously defend the agency as carrying out enforcement actions. They find under the NRCA Act is $50,000 Jamaican dollars. It's been that way from the beginning. They've talked about raising the fine for at least 10 years. And it's $5,000 Jamaican dollars for each day the nuisance or the infraction continues. So that's, your speeding ticket is more. And you further have to prosecute the company, right? So even were NEPA to be of the mindset to get serious about the 53 exceedances, they then have to go to court over it. And the companies are experts at delaying that. So by the time I've seen several cases that have eventually been about to come to court, at which point the companies, they're not necessarily bauxite companies, all manner of companies simply say, you know what, we'll pay the fine at this point. But they've tied up the agency in court for 5, 6, 8 years, right? In terms of what needs to be done, I think we all have to have much more interest in the environmental permits that are issued. These are public documents, right? Every month, NEPA prints the decisions of the NRCA board. You can go online and you can see what decisions have been taken. It's not well organized, so you can't kind of say, well, I want to see what is being done in my area. So it does take a little bit from you, but you can look and see what the decisions are. And if there are things that concern you, you can ask for the environmental permits. And they look intimidating because they're up to like 26 pages and stuff. But for the most part, they're not intimidating at all. There's a big long preamble and then there's a set of conditions. Usually there's a condition for a company, if it's a public health matter, to have a complaints register, right? That's a basic thing every one of us can do. Make sure that the company has a complaints register and make sure it's accessible to the public and make sure it is used. I can't tell you how many people that have complained about this and that, and you've told them have you used a complaints register, nobody know about it, whether yes it's there, you need to keep a log, you need to go and report it, and then when Jet does get involved and go to the NRCA or NEPA and say this is disgraceful, they call for the complaints register is not one thing. The impact assessment thing is again a process everyone can be involved with. Now there is no mandatory requirement for an EIA. So when Esther pointed out that in the small SML 172, there was no EIA done, there doesn't have to be. It's entirely discretionary on behalf of the NRCA and NEPA, right? This is something we've been talking about for 15 years. We've been trying to get regulations for the EIAs, so who can do them, what they must cover. These are the kinds of things that are not abstract, arbitrary things, we can all get involved in trying to get those things passed. Get the permits, monitor them. They're not supposed to take down X kind of tree. They're not supposed to, they're often time constrained. They're not supposed to work over a certain number of hours. Get the permit, know what it says, and let NEPA know people are watching. I can go on for a very long time, as you know, so I'll stop there.
Yes, sorry we don't have all day. Rach? Now, when you were doing your work at Alcan, were they self-monitoring?
Yeah, I don't recall ever having to submit anything to a government agency at all.
So can you talk a bit about what the environmental division was supposed to be doing and what its relationship to law enforcement and government was?
I don't know that there was any because I'm not as young as I look, alright? Back then, I don't know that there was any real requirement or mandate that you need to, for example, submit any kind of monitoring report, for example. So I would just go out, monitor water quality, go to all the different sites, and basically just keep along. There really wasn't anything to it. But if I may, I think that one of the areas to that I see wanting and has almost been wanting, but I think your movie actually addressed it, is the mental health, the stress associated. When that woman in the video started to cuss about the dining area, and you notice how angry she got? So there's this study by in the International Journal of Public Health and Clinical Studies, and it's very interesting because they actually measured quantitatively mental health and stress, and it's one of the few studies where, because how do you calculate this stress? I mean, you measure the blood pressure and all of that, but they actually managed to, over time, quantify the levels of stress. And it was simple things. The women, of course, in this particular country, who are responsible for cleaning the house, they have to clean twice as hard or 3 times more, increases the stress level. You saw an increase in certain behaviors, violence, certain things. I mean, in this particular culture, a man comes in the house not clean or the food. These things translate, and it's very real. I know I used to get agitated trying to do schoolwork, and I'm sneezing my heart out, or I can't breathe, need to go get nebulized. You get frustrated after a while. You can get depressed from it as well, because that was the other dimension. All these kids and these women, and you see the rate of depression increase, and this is again within a certain vicinity of the particular bauxite mine that the study was done around. So there's that dimension. There's also the dimension of we hear the study the other day coming out, and you heard it disputed in Parliament about the poverty level, whether it has, the data shows it has increased, poverty level has increased. Well, if we're looking at mining, one of the things I was talking to Hugh about, and I mean, if I may just quickly reference this. If you look, and I went into the cockpit country and actually making some visits there, and when you look at 1 acre of yam, 1 acre of yam, that's about 2,000 hills, right? And that's equivalent of, let's say, 10 pounds at $80 a pound. When you do the math, it works out to $1.6 million from that 1 acre, right? Yam is every 10 months approximately, it's reaped. So every 10 months, you have the potential to earn from 1 acre of yam, $1.6 million. When you take away all of that from mining, what do you think will happen to the man who plant yam, or the woman who takes it to market to sell, or the children who, that's what sends them to school? There are health impacts, stress level impacts. I don't want to be in a household where my opportunity to earn $1.6 million is being taken away. And just to finalize it by saying, my foster brother exports yam. That's how I got to know the Alps very well, long before even going there for company. And he hires young men from Spanish Town, Maypen, Old Harbour, along there, just to keep them out of trouble. They've been with him over 5-6 years. I asked him, I said to him, you see the plan to mine, you're not going to be able to get your yam from from Alps anymore. I said, what are you going to do? He said, at my stage of life, I just shut down the packing house. I said, but what's going to happen to the young men? His response to me, set up another SOE. I got what he said, what he meant. These young men are ultimately going to end up back in that SOE when they're actually out there trying to do, stay out of trouble, stay employed. What does mining have to do with YAM, have to do with Mayfair, Spanish Town, and Old Harbour, have to do with an SOE? It's all connected.
That was brilliant. And what we have here, two things, all connected but very important. One is a mental health issue. One is the grief, right? The absolute heart-rendering grief. When I was on Dr. Green's land with him and Jati, and just knowing the pain, right, of watching what you love being destroyed. Ecocide and genocide are hand in hand, okay? In Gordon Town, I no longer walk my walk because they cut down the trees, okay? I cannot take the pain of that, all right? So there is intense pain passed down through the generations, but felt in the moment, that comes from ecocide. There is the impoverishment of the communities, and we keep hearing about jobs, and we're going to talk about that in the next session. But we keep hearing about jobs and economic benefits. What happens in the rural areas is impoverishment, okay? Displacement and impoverishment. Not just for now, but for generations to come. We're running out of time, believe it or not. And we haven't gotten to climate change. So let me just quickly go back to Rachel, please. Let's talk about the industry and climate change and the current tree planting fetish. Go for it.
So, where do I even start? The trees, the trees provide, it's not just a tree, you know, we talk about the trees, we see it as just a tree, but the entire service that the trees, it's an ecosystem and it provides a myriad of services, some not even, I believe, quantifiable. I mean, when I sit down and I look at a green space, nobody can actually measure how relaxed I am. And that's one of the reasons I try to exit. I'm a country girl, as you all know. I try to exit Kingston as often as I can. But in terms of climate change, if we were to look at the value of those trees, I mean, concrete country is about what, 82,000 hectares? Where we draw the boundary? Well, the stakeholder about hectare, right? So if we were to go by like the Edwards study, let's use that then, fair enough. You will see that the cockpit country actually extracts approximately 1 million tons of carbon dioxide per year. But people just seem to think that it is just extraction, to what we call carbon sequestration, just taking it out, which is good. But there is value in the storage of it. And I've read now 2 studies, the Edwards study and another one which is not yet published, which is stating that there's actually more than 40 million tons equivalent of carbon dioxide stored in the boundary, as we know it. That's significant. Why is that significant? It's significant because in the world of climate change, and this is from the international perspective, like the program I managed, that's $1.2 billion. It's global. And what would happen is that we go into countries and we would try to set up programs, not just for resiliency and adaptation, which are beautiful buzzwords being used here a lot, but you see a preference being given to countries that are being responsible, right? when Jamaica extracts that, we no longer have the advantage of going to these international conventions, to these meetings, or to a program like what I was running and saying, oh, we're responsible. We're not. We're actually contributing significantly to climate change. You can't talk through two sides of your mouth. Planting trees now is one thing, but cutting down a tree that has actually stored the carbon is another thing completely. And I think we're going to get to the point, because you start to see donors asking the questions. You saw it in Guyana. The Norwegians gave Guyana a lot of money for Red Plus, and you saw what happened when they gave, I think it was the Chinese government came in and did cut some trees and stuff, and the Norwegians came right down. You've not done this correctly, we want our money back, cut the funding. You're starting to see more of that. And if Jamaica doesn't wake up to the fact that donors are no longer just dishing out money for climate change, other than the token $6 million, $3 million, that's monkey money. In the world of climate change, that's monkey money. You want real money, start to trade your carbon value and recognize the value and importance of the role of what the Coptic country forests are actually serving in terms of the ecosystem services.
Thanks for that. Patrice, is there one thing that comes to mind that you see as an obvious problem with an obvious solution? Doesn't have to be one, but something that you see in terms of the health impacts or whatever that you think is something we can start to work up towards immediately.
Well, I mean, I mentioned it earlier on, and it is the link between monitoring the environmental exposure and linking that to the health of community residents. And as Rachel pointed out, everything is linked. So if communities are exposed to environmental hazards and they get sick, there's going to be a rush on community clinics and hospitals, and we already know what's happening in the clinics and the hospitals and the waiting time. And the minister is already calling and saying that there's an issue, the affordability. Government is, as far as public hospitals are concerned, that's government's bill. So everything is linked together. So if you're monitoring your environmental exposures and you are monitoring the health of the individuals, if you know that the exposures are increasing, you know that control the exposure so that people don't get sick. People don't get sick, there isn't a rush on the hospitals. If there isn't a rush on the hospitals, then guess what? You're spending less money in the hospitals. So that's the obvious thing. Monitor the environmental exposures.
Great. Dana, is there something, I mean, you were recently, sadly, seeing what is happening in Gibraltar and Madras and anticipating what we will stop happening in 173. You've been seeing this for decades. Is there something that really stands out in terms of the industry and its impacts and what can be done to try and stop it or slow it down or whatever?
Two different things really. I mean, I remember you probably remember on our drive to make the first film, seeing the houses that had been built for the bauxite workers who were first displaced to Windsor. So you're in Windsor, near to Windsor Research Center, and there were these bauxite houses that the people from St. Anne were supposed to be moved to. And honestly, they were like a porta potty. They were that small, and they were by then in dereliction. No one was actually living in them and stuff. But I remember that being a moment that I thought, well, if people really saw those images and knew that in fact this is what is being contemplated when we hear that people are being moved around and this is what is being provided for them, I thought there would be no one who would not be outraged. So I think your film is part of what needs to happen, Esther, that not many of us are driving around the country, not many of us are speaking to the people affected, not many of us know even how to approach that, but if we can find ways to bring those images and those stories to the larger society, I really think that is what is necessary. And some of what's happening across the country, as you said, is hopeful, because certainly in my time, I have not seen the amount of support and organization and willingness to, protest, go to parliament, go and confront regulators. The country has been much more successful and many other things that I've seen. So more of that needs to happen. To support what Patrice is saying. There's, there's a moment I dread in an environmental talk when I start to talk about biodiversity. Because I figure everybody's going, oh God, ferns, snails, whatever, aluminium snakes, lizard. But you can find very few people who are in favor of forest, right? So I think the public health aspects of environmental protection resonate with people. And so we not only need to monitor the bauxite companies, and again, if Mr. Knight was here, he'd say he is, right? But that data has to be public, and it has to be in a form that we can understand it, because you can get it, Jeff has got it, but you get this spreadsheet of 900 pages that you can make neither head nor tail out of. So it has to be proactively disclosed, it has to be in a form that the layperson can use, and we have to use it. Those are the things that is the number one thing I like to see happening. I do not understand our complacency around air quality, truly. Because everyone, rich, poor, whatever, has to breathe. You can't not breathe for a minute. And I don't understand why we tolerate the really horrible air quality we have, not just from bauxite, but other things.
Thank you. Before
I'm just saying, as for the solution cannot be, which was said, and I won't say who said it, but the solution cannot be lock up in your house, close the windows, and put some shirt around the windows so the dust can't come in. That cannot be the solution. And put a towel under the door.
Yeah, definitely not. Before I open it to the audience, I just want to say that one of the saddest things is that communities are so dependent on the bauxite companies, water, but it's not just that, it's that we've impoverished rural communities to such a point that they're living off of the $1,000 they get every 2 months, okay? And that we call it nuisance. That's such a colonial and stupid term. It's not a nuisance, it's not noise nuisance, it's not dust nuisance. And so, we have people, what happens is, and this is what's happening right now, okay? You can go into communities like Gibraltar and see it happening right now. They come in, they mine, they're mining right up to the school, the children are sick, teachers start to resign. People who can leave, okay? Left behind are people who are traumatized, depressed, dependent, manipulated, all right? And those people become dependent to the point of accepting anything. And so the school principal at the school in Gibraltar, which is a school that a lot of energy has gone into, Naranda gave them paint to paint the place, okay? And the fact that it can look pretty is as important as the fact that the students and the teachers are not coming to school, okay? Jamaica, we have normalized this kind of awful, awful transaction, which is, well, it better than what? It better than being dead, all right? That is the standard. I am alive. And that goes all the way back to slavery, okay? That we don't expect the majority of Jamaicans to live with dignity, to have clean air, clean water, okay? Agency, choice. We expect the majority of Jamaicans to shut up and take it and be sacrificed for the elite and some stupid notion of modernity and development. All right. Please, our friends with the mic. Thank you. She had her hand up a long time.
Hi, Zara Burton again. I'm a reporter with 18 Degrees North. Some questions for Nana and also Patrice. Patrice, in the piece, you mentioned there was no net effect analysis, I believe. The idea that the cost-benefit analysis of development versus environmental degradation, which one wins out, yeah? And Dana, you mentioned in your anecdote about the idea that you said what could happen is that the plant would close and everybody else in the room kind of shut down and the meeting got dismantled. Politicians have citizenry to answer to in terms of jobs. They also have the environmentalists to answer to in terms of degradation. So what is the advice? Because it seems that we have perpetually failed at good monitoring of situations. So it seems like monitoring is not for the bureaucrats because they don't do it well or that well. What do you suggest? Because is there a middle ground at all, or should we just not even bother with any kind of mining at all? And if that is the case, then why are we prospecting for oil even when it comes to Jamaica? So what is the advice that you give to those in charge making decisions for us, the electorate?
So I would like to see a world where those two things are not separated, that my job and my environment were not something I had to choose between. And I think we've been sold that bill of goods, right? We've been told that we have to make a choice, and it's actually not true. I'd like to see us all say, you know, yes, I'd like meaningful, well-paid employment, but not at the expense of my health. And I think, and if you're sick, you can't work, and your children are sick, and so forth. So I think that's the way the debate has been very successfully framed in Jamaica by the politicians, and we should not bite, right? It is their responsibility, in fact, to look out for the public interest. And the public interest is more than jobs. So in fact, what happens, you know, you take when that Gisco plant opened back in Manchester, you know, there was plenty talk about how it was going to be the state of the art and how the jobs and how everybody was rejoicing about the jobs and there would be no pollution and we've learned our lesson and all that kind of stuff. What's happened, right? The same people who are desperately welcoming the jobs are now having the same problems that always attended that plant. And we cannot leave it to the most desperate among us to make this argument, right? It has to be us, it has to be those of us who are not desperate and not in fact living next to the plant, because we are the ones with the choices to say this is absolutely unacceptable. I do not accept that the people around any bauxite plant or in any rural area are the ones that are being sacrificed so I can have aluminium foil. That's an argument for all of us to make. And we should not let the politicians get away with the argument of, oh, it's 300 jobs or whatever.
Yes, and again, I would say, as far as the economy is concerned, absolutely important. Sustainable development, absolutely important. But I strongly believe that there can be a balance. As it is right now, public health is not being considered enough. So the economy has the greatest, as far as attention and weight, and the health of the people in the economy is not given the attention. So again, I will be, and always will be, a strong advocate for a public health tracking system. That way, you can have the part where you have industrial development, which will feed the economy. Of course we need it. We need funding, we need money, we need jobs. But then you'll still be showing that you care about the people that actually live in the country that's going to be working in the factories that you're bringing in. So you're looking at their public health, you're ensuring and you're holding these factories accountable for what they're doing, the industrial factories accountable for what they're doing, and you're managing the health of the country. So yes, a public health tracking system is the way that the government will create balance between environment, health, and the economy.
No, I just want to say that when I hear, I agree with Diana in the sense that when we say the government. It's almost like a them and a us. The government is us. They work for us. We are the government. You know. So that's one. Two, I just want to say also that it's a non-renewable resource. Any government that can hinge their development on a non-renewable resource is heading in the wrong direction.
So the panel that is about to begin is going to address these issues, so please hang on to that. One last question with Lloyd, please.
Okay, no, I know that the next panel will discuss...
Well, then if it is no, please questions...
Allow me, please. The next panel will discuss the cost-benefit analysis of bauxite mining. But what is, I think, is a shortcoming in terms of this panel, given that it has more scientific expertise, is the question of whether there is such a thing as sustainable bauxite mining. It seems to be a contradiction in terms. In other words, you cannot be concerned about the health of people and also talking about mining bauxite. So you have to come and answer that question. Do we need to close down the bauxite company because it is detrimental to the health of the people?
No one on the panel would argue that bauxite mining is sustainable. It is an extractive resource. By definition, it is an unsustainable activity.
Well, the person beside you is not saying that. You have a difference between both of you.
She agrees with me. But what Patrice is trying to say, and I agree, is while there is bauxite mining going on, we ought not to allow this to happen in the absence of a public health tracking. But none of us here would say that bauxite mining in any form is an...
Okay, thank you very much, panelists, please.
Patrice doesn't want to say.
Ditto. You know, we're all on the same team here. And we all agree, and which is exactly what Diana is saying. What my concern is how you create balance when industrial activity is taking place. And as I said prior to, and I will continue to advocate, a public health tracking system must take place, especially in those communities located within the 10-mile radius of any industrial. I know it's not happening, that's why I'm advocating for it to happen.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to the panelists, please. I'm sorry it was so short and we just straight the surface. Thank you, darlings. Our panelists today, Professor Luan, excuse me please, thank you. Professor Luan Berkeley is Professor of International Business at the MonaMedia School of Business. She has published widely on resource-driven foreign direct investment. Her most recent book, Managing FDI for Development in Resource-Rich States, The Caribbean Experience, examines the bauxite industry in 3 CARICOM countries, Jamaica, Suriname, and Guyana, and the proposed aluminum smelter in Trinidad and Tobago. She's currently researching the proposed oil extraction in Guyana. Peter Bunting is Member of Parliament for Central Manchester. He was the Shadow Minister of Industry, Investment and Competitiveness and is currently the opposition spokesman on education and training. Over his political career, he has represented constituents in Clarendon and Manchester who are directly impacted by bauxite mining and aluminum refinery. He was trained as a mechanical engineer and actually one summer interned in an aluminum refinery, so actually has hands-on experience and knows what he's talking about. He has an MBA and is an investment banker who has founded a number of financial institutions. Dr. Wesley Hughes is an economist whose postgraduate thesis was on the global aluminum industry. For over 40 years, Wesley has held many important positions in government, including Director General of the Policy Institute of Jamaica. Planning. Sorry. DIOJ, Deputy Governor of Bank of Jamaica. He was the Financial Secretary of Jamaica, Director of Economics and Statistics at the Jamaica Bauxite Institute. So we can have that JDI conversation. And most recently, the CEO of the Petro-Caribbean Development Fund. So I think he knows a bit about economics, political economy, and I think we're going to have a wonderful discussion. We're going to start off, as before, each panelist will have their chance to say whatever they want about the topic. And Luann, you can start.
Use mine. There you go.
Okay, I started working on the bauxite industry when Norman Caban sent me an email. That was in 2008, I believe, or 2008. He and Al Francis had this wonderful idea. Yes. Are you hearing me now? Yes.
Close up.
I like that you liked it. Yes, that is I started writing on researching on the bauxite industry in 2008. Noel Gavan had sent me an email asking me if I wanted to work on a study on bauxite with him. You know who's Norman? So of course I was very honored. He and Al Francis at the time had this idea of working on something called the hypofacting mode. I didn't even know the meaning of it. After I said yes, I went to the dictionary and found what the word meant. Reading what it says, and it makes me very sad, my position here, as I cried when I heard a documentary. When I saw how the government used the resources, the little resources they got from bauxite. And one of the things was, it started in the 1980s actually. What they did was, for budgetary support, for fiscal support, what they did, I will sell aluminum in the forward market at a fixed price, where the cost remains fixed for 10 years. That 10 years or more, that meant when aluminum prices increased, when production costs increased, the government got the same income from bauxite. It was one person called Glencore. It started first with the Olympics, with a loan, with a bobsled team, and with one government, and the other government said, I will never do it, and the government did it again, did it again, did it again, did it again. So all we are talking about the environmental disasters, the health disasters, we earn very little from it. And that made me very sad. Meanwhile, I'm looking at this, I'm looking at Jamaica's position worldwide. I'm in international business, so I'm looking at Jamaica's position worldwide in the aluminum industry. In 1952, when Esther's speaking, those were the glory days of Jamaica. Number one, bauxite produced in the world, number two, aluminum produced in the world. By 1987, the 70s, 80s, and it wasn't only the bauxite levy, other forces as well. It begins to slip, the industry becomes increasingly uncompetitive, where now you see the players moving out, the large companies, the Alcoa, the Alcan, Reynolds, Kaiser, and now we get the ones, the new entry like Rusal, and the Chinese firm we never heard about. What do we pay for this, other than very ill children and fiscal deficits? And the fiscal account of Jamaica is linked to the prosperity of the aluminum industry. When it slides, the country slides. When I finished writing and doing the research for this, I remember it was during the Beijing Olympics. And I was very, very upset. And I'm not even talking about yet the companies we own, because Jamaica owns companies. Jamaica owns Jamaica Bauxite, Jamaica Bauxite Mining, CAP, BATCO. The first two are operating at tremendous losses. This is serious, you know. And to cap it all, the bauxite we Jamaica needs, it wasn't properly managed. Normally, I think, that is what I was told, you mix the high quality with the poor quality. What the companies did was just use all of the high quality. So it's no surprise they're going to the cockpit, right? Because the bauxite is almost exhausted. Understand? So after reading and writing all of this, which we did a very good paper and published it internationally, I gave the results to JBI. I'm like that. No, I'm not a salad, I gave to them.
Not you.
And of course I became persona non grata after that.
That's what he meant. That's what
So then I saw Usain Bolt winning golds. And I said to myself, Jamaica needs a Usain Bolt because this country is going to get in serious economic crisis. And from that, I actually did much more work on bauxite. I did my own work on bauxite in Jamaica, my own paper, and then I did the region, and then I was even more depressed because Jamaica looks good compared to Suriname, compared to Guyana. That same dam you saw in Suriname where they displaced the Maroons, they built it to get a hydroelectrical power station, which they no longer use. And the Maroons now are displaced people. So the history of bauxite is a history of resources in this region. And with this, I'm going to stop. I think I only had 3 minutes and I spoke for more than 3 minutes. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter because you're brilliant. Peter?
All right, since I'm not brilliant, I will try to stay in my 3 minutes. But as you know, a politician with an audience, that's going to be difficult.
Wear your other hat.
So my first encounter with the industry, my mother worked at Alcan, Port Esquel for 20 years. It was right beside where the farm that we lived on. And in '79, I went to McGill and doing an engineering degree. And my second year, they tripled the fees on us. They moved it, we used to pay what Canadians paid my first year. And by the second year, they tripled the fees and said, you foreign students must stop freeloading on us. And I remember then pointing to the most impressive skyscraper in Montreal, which was the headquarters of the Alcan building at the time, and saying, hold on, my mother helped build that. So don't tell me I'm freeloading. You know, a whole heap of Jamaica helped build that. Interestingly, while doing engineering for 2 or 3 summers, I interned at the Jamalco plant. And, you know, I have a first-hand knowledge of what a hostile environment working in that plant is. I mean, you end the day, your skin would be scratching, your all this other respiratory problems, etc. Then in '93, I was elected Member of Parliament for Southeast Clarendon, where the Jamaica plant is located. Again, first-hand knowledge of the deterioration of the zinc roofs in the immediate surrounding communities. I think it was acid rain that was falling on them. Just a really hostile environment around the plant. 2007, I was elected to Central Manchester. Now, again, this constituency has everything. Mining, mud lake, refining, I mean, railway, you name it, everything. And I was just at the tail end of the operations. So I've been MP for 12 years. I really only had like 1 year or a year and a half of operations, and then it closed down. So my experience there has been about the consequences of bauxite mining, where I haven't really seen the benefit, just the consequences. And the consequences are enormous because first of all, the devastation of the social capital in the communities that the bauxite mining fractures and splinters and scatters them all over. I remember an elderly lady saying to me, she used to live from operating a shop at her gate in Broadleaf, the original community. After she was relocated somewhere else, she tried operating the shop at her gate and was basically taken to the cleaners by people who would take goods on credit and not pay. And she said to me, but in my old community, I knew everybody. I knew who I could trust. They put me in another community with pure teeth. And that's just like one micro example. But I chaired a committee, the Sessional Select Committee on Economy and Production in Parliament in 2008. And I had the mining companies, the JBI, a lot of the players come to before us. And what was disappointing in the 6 decades or so that mining and refining had taken place in Jamaica, the JBI had not sponsored any long-term study of the health impact on the communities that were affected. In fact, the JBI saw itself more as a lobbyist for the industry, in my mind. That was my impression. Their job was to keep the industry going. It wasn't sort of weighing the scales of the company versus the interests of consumers and trying to get some balance. They were really the in-house, in-government lobbyists for the industry, which I think was a bad model. And it has, I think to a large extent, NEPA has been their co-conspirator in that effort. In Parliament, subsequently, I have repeatedly made, we debate this every year basically. We have a debate on this because whenever they're withdrawing funds from the capital development fund to the transferring funds from the capital development to the consolidated fund, we get an opportunity to debate this. And I make the same points over and over again. And like the state of emergency, I am a rather lonely voice for this, advocating for this issue. In case of SOA, I'm advocating against it. But I say, for example, why when the revenues are being earned from the production and export of the bauxite, an escrow account isn't established to put the reclamation and that whatever proportional amount from that ton of bauxite that's earned should go into an escrow account, which they can then use for reclamation. Or if something happens, as we've seen frequently happen, the companies go bankrupt, they leave, the government would have at least a fund available that the government could do the remedial work. And everybody agrees, and nothing is done. I'd say, and if you know, the reclamation work is often 12, 15 years behind. And the companies have a trick that they do, is that they mine out 95% of the pit and leave about 5%. And so they say this is still an open pit. So the clock doesn't start running on the reclamation. And so I have open pits in my constituency now, 15, 20 years, that theoretically have them not finished mining. And it's a safety hazard, it's all kind of risks. But my own view, in speaking for my constituency, we never want to see bauxite mining and refining there are. Certainly let me say I, because I can't pretend that we're going to be homogeneous, all 50 or 60,000 people. But as a political representative, I don't see any benefit for continuing that. And we're struggling to mitigate the legacy of 5 or 6 decades of it. And yet the the high school overlooking the Kirkbride plant is still on the shift system. The primary school overlooking the Kirkbride plant still doesn't have potable water, piped water. The communities have not benefited from what has taken place, and in fact, they've been devastated.
Wesley, your turn, please.
Thank you very much. Gosh, where do I start? Defending JBI? But my life in the industry has been very long. As I said this morning, I got a scholarship from Alcan, which I didn't benefit from any at all. I didn't know money was associated with scholarship. I just got the scholarship. And I got the scholarship and I didn't get any money from it. Because at the time we had free education at the university level. And so everything was paid for. And in 1986 I was bored with my job at the JBI and I decided to come over here to do some studies. And I went to register and the person in the account section said, "Do you work for the university?" I said, "No." So, "We have a lot of money here against your name. Where does it come from?" I said, "No, will you inquire for me?" And he inquired, he said, it was my scholarship that I had won so many years before and didn't get any money from it. The long story is that my wife called me the night to say that the pipe under the house got busted and the cost for fixing it was exactly the amount of money that was associated with the scholarship. So that was my benefit. I had my association with the industry starting with Dr. Norman Gervan. My first job was at a planning agency with Norman Gervan. We were in a good position where I was able to turn down 3 jobs in a week. One at the Bank of Jamaica and one at the Ministry of Mining, so I could work with Norman Gervan. My decision to do my thesis in the aluminum sector was influenced by Norman in the sense that he organized a seminar in Runaway Bay on technology, the role of technology in development. And from there I went to Sussex School and did my thesis in the industry, visiting many plants, Organish in Ireland, all the plants in Jamaica. Then I worked at the JBI. So I have a fairly good knowledge of the industry. And I want to speak about something that was not mentioned, except in passing. When someone mentioned the fact that you needed so much energy to generate aluminium. Aluminium is, in a sense, almost crystallized electricity. It is so energy intensive. But the industry is a very technologically driven industry. Never mind the mining component, which is the part that we are most exposed to. The alumina operation is an old mature technology developed by the Bayer people in Germany from the 1880s. And they're using the same technology today in essence, but they have modernized it. And so the technology has remained fixed in a strategic sense. But they have been improving gradually over the years. And the plants are becoming more efficient and more cost-effective in a sense. But we have never paid sufficient attention to the technology, and much of the argument that we face are technological ones. A lot of data is produced by the industry. Every single plant collects information. The government of Jamaica collects a lot of information, a lot of data on the industry. But there's very little synergy between the universities, the research institutions, the JBI, and the data that is collected. So there's very little scholarship that is taking place in dealing with some of our problems. And most of the scholarship that is given are given by the companies. So Alcan gave a scholarship, and they were given a lot of scholarships. very little of the scholarship undertaken from the data collected would be related to solving some of the problems that we are confronting here today. One of the things that I noted about our divestment strategy in the industry over the years, we have divested many of the plants. They've closed down Reynolds, Kaiser, Alken, Anaconda, Revere. None of those plants exist. Well, Alcor still exists in a sense as a partner with the government in Clarendon. But the people who have taken over are mainly traders. Most of them are traders. Noble, to a large extent, UC Russell as part of the group with Mark Rich, Glencore, are traders in the industry. So they have very little interest in the investment and in the technology side of the business. The reason why you have UC Russell still remaining in Jamaica is because the plant that they have here, which is a very high cost one, Jamaica production cost is very, very high. The scope, the size of the plant, very small, relatively speaking. The productivity level, relatively low. The cost of energy, very high. The only reason why Russell has been able to make a profit of it is because they send the alumina to Siberia, where energy cost is almost zero, hydropower. And so they're able to marry very high cost alumina in Jamaica with very low energy costs in Siberia and make aluminium. One last point I want to make in my opening comment here. Jamaica has been very unfortunate in a sense. The price of aluminium today on the world market is about the same as it was in 1989, just about 80-something cents per pound. Jamaica is locked into an industry, the aluminum industry, that had benefited almost in no way from the commodity boom of the last 20 years, the rise of China. So the price of aluminum has remained either flat or declined over the last 20, 25 years. Why? After the World War II ended, aluminum became a commodity in the consumer business and became a major growth industry and the demand. So all the transfer of facilities in aluminum to the consumer market took place in the context of a growing economy, growing demand, and prices were going up. At the end of the Cold War in 1989, and today's celebration in Berlin of this, almost all the facilities for making aluminum in Russia and elsewhere were transferred into the consumer business. And so production of aluminum for consumer business took off dramatically, and therefore the price collapsed. And then China entered the market, and China has transformed itself today. In 1989, it had less than 5% of global production. Today, it has close to 40% of global production. So the price of aluminum has remained flat or declined, and we were locked into that. And so our industry had no possibility, none whatsoever, of growing. China, when they came here in Alpart, I told a couple of friends of mine they would not last. Why? That plant is so old. You have to, and if you close an aluminum plant for 10, 15 years, between the acid and everything, you have to completely retrofit the plant. To have tried to start up the plant and run slurry through those block or clog tubes was not going to do it. And without high cost, it was only a matter of time that this was going to happen. it's not going to work. They're going to have to spend a lot of money almost rebuilding the plant.
Okay, thank you for that overview. Luann, you have studied the region. Could you mention what lessons you think apply to Jamaica and thinking forward? How do you see the future of the industry in Jamaica?
It's sort of kind of, are you hearing me? I think it links to what Dr. Hughes has just said. I think the future is different. I've seen I think the most graphic thing I saw, which I could not, this I wish I could have taken a photograph of it or documented it, was the Crater Lakes in Guyana. Guyana's bauxite is not the same as the bauxite in Suriname and Jamaica. It's the most expensive bauxite in the world. Bauxite, Guyana in the 1970s was held a monopoly in bauxite of it. By the 1990s, about 2% of the world's supply. When I saw the exhaust bauxite mines, and it's nothing like what you see here, they form water crater lakes, and the region becomes a desert town. I fear if Jamaica is not strategic enough and decide how am I going to revamp this industry, that will be the future. Similarly, you see that in Suriname when alcohol left. So no matter what you say in environmentally, also mentioned the communities are dependent on the industry. So we now need to think what we are going to do given everything that Dr. Hughes just said. Because the plants, two of the plants, when alcohol and alpat, are more than 60 years old. Production costs are high, energy costs are high, environmental concerns are high. What is going to happen to bauxite? We are keep on attracting the players who are in the lower league. Alcohol is not coming back, Alcan is not coming back, their corporate strategy has changed. Jamaica is no longer a sexy location. Let's be very realistic. What you need to know now is, how could we now decide what is the future of bauxite? Would it be only Jamaica? And if it's only Jamaica, what would that mean? I think that's the conversation that needs to be had.
You mentioned the conversation needs to be had. Do you have any ideas or not?
What? I guess, well.
I mean, should it be just Jamaica? I mean,
I think it should be best. I think, okay, you want me to expand? Yes. I think it should maybe just Jamaica. The other two are too expensive to operate. Too expensive. And no company at this stage, where the prices are flat and are declining, will go and revitalize your refinery, your refinery literally. And what we forgot to say is, when somewhere around the 1990s, 1980s, the government gave an incentive to all companies to, okay, if you recapitalize your refinery, if you made it up to modern state-of-the-art equipment there, you will not pay the bauxite levy. Or you'll have a diminished bauxite levy. That is true. The only company who took advantage of this was Jamaica. It's Rusal, who was operating Renalco and Alpha, and Renalco and Alpha, I think, never bothered. So we are stuck with refineries which are not competitive. So what are we going to do? Is a company ever going to come and revitalize it? I don't think so. So I think, just as to say what it is, I think Jamaica could be just the only company in existence.
Okay. So Peter, why do you think, what you see as a, you mentioned the cost benefit, that you see it as a cost rather than a benefit. So two-part question. Why is the government addicted to the industry that won't even think of an exit plan? And what would replace the revenues that the government gets? And what are the kind of industries, jobs, strategies going forward that you recommend?
Okay, one of the things I should point out is that the industry today is very different than it was when my mother worked here in the 60s and 70s. The if you went on an aluminum plant or one of their facilities, it reflected the fact that they had a tremendous long-term investment there, and that they were a vertically integrated company. They had planned to be here for decades. And even the grounds, the plant maintenance, the facilities were quite impressive. They were best in class. Today, if you go to Yorton, it looks like a junkyard. The same administration building that was there when my mother worked there 40 years ago has not been improved. You go in the bathrooms, the junjo growing on the ceiling, the place looks like it's being held up by masking tape. All the mining is being done by contractors. The haulage is being done by contractors. Most of the workers are contractors. The feed to the plant is being done by contractors. The vehicles that are there are leased. When these operators decide to leave, literally they just have to pick up your briefcase. This is no long-term investment. This is bottom feeding that's taking place. And so you think how much attention these people are going to pay to the environmental liabilities that they're building up while they're operating. I suggest to you it's not going to be a priority for them. So it's a very different industry even than it was when it started. In 2008, when Kirkvine closed, both Kirkvine and Alpart closed, and both had an impact on my constituency, on the economy of my constituency. Because the only thing that we really got then was the payroll, but it was still significant. It was 40 million US per year was the payroll. And because the government has had to waive most of the levies and taxes, etc., over the years to keep them going. And so we had community consultations. We came up with a plan for the constituency. We spoke of life after Bauxite, and we came up with a plan about how the economy of the constituency would stand on. But first of all, we visioned that this constituency would be a center of excellence for the knowledge-based industries rather than the extractive industries. We saw the three pillars that would stand on was education, ICT/BPO, and healthcare. And we developed that plan and we worked that plan. So we got Sutherland Global to come in with a BPO center that more than compensated for the job losses. And again, remember, the jobs in Bauxite now, no premium paying job. Most of them are contractors that are paying very modest wages. So BPO itself is modest, but at least it doesn't have the environmental damage that the bauxite industry has. So we replaced the jobs in 3 times over by getting the BPOs there. We added 2,000 new quality high school spaces. And today, the education sector employs twice as many persons as the bauxite industry used to employ. Similarly, we've had expansion in the healthcare. So I think, it's certainly not going to be difficult to replace, because the value added today from the bauxite industry is very little. We're really scraping along, and I really there's a kind of groupthink that is operating, I think, in Parliament and in the policy levels of government, that there is some inherent value to continue. It's just like we've always done this, so let's just keep plowing on because it's a good thing. And it's just assumed to be a good thing. But nobody will do the cost-benefit analysis, despite calling for it over and over. Nobody will do the cost-benefit analysis because the decision makers are too invested in the industry itself. They won't have a job. There won't be a minister of mining. There won't be a an executive director of the JBI. There won't be a chairman of CAP. There won't be all the jobs for the boys that go around when you have this industry. So they're automatically depending, while, you know, it's just a few crazy environmentalists who are speaking on the other side.
So you mentioned job replacement. What about foreign exchange and the other claims that the government needs in terms of revenue?
Well, as I said, it's, you know, I tried to get from my friend Nigel Clark a table that he shared in Parliament within the last year. I think it was earlier this year. But essentially what it shows is over time, just the returns from royalty, levy, and income tax, just on a steady downward trajectory. I wouldn't say it's negligible, but certainly compared to the halcyon days, you know, it's now, you know, a relatively modest amount. Sorry? About 4% of the.
I'm going to ask Wesley now. So, Wesley, could you address that, please, both in terms of why is the government so committed to the industry, and what are the revenues that are coming in, and how could you see them being replaced by something else?
Well, as Peter said, the bulk of the revenue that came into the country, the earnings for the country, was in terms of wages and salaries, and a fixed amount as royalty, which is about 15 cents or thereabouts. No, not levy, royalty. A small, like $1 per ton. Yeah, it predated the levy. Most of the companies are not paying any levy. In fact, some of them are asking for a subsidy to continue to operate because it's been so difficult for some of them because the production cost is very, very high. And they're not meeting all the costs. You have identified in your movie many costs that have not been taken on board, the environmental costs, the health costs. So the true costs of running the industry is not being faced. That's the bottom line. So at the end of the day, I don't think it's about the dollars and cents. It's a kind of an intellectual inertia, a national inertia. We have been doing this. It's like sugar. Yeah. We are trapped in this. We know from the analysis that there's no long-term future for the sugar industry as we know it. But it's a slow, gradual decline. The same thing is happening for bauxite and aluminum. And countries that depend on these mature industries, there's no other way to keep going without reducing your costs. And in the case of sugar, where the majority of the people the cost is labor, you have to keep reducing the value of labor. In the case of the bauxite and aluminum sector, you have to keep reducing the levy and the revenue to the government. As of now, I don't think the revenue derived by the government from the industry is more than about 4 or 5% of its total revenue annually. There was a time when it was close to 40% in the 1970s. And that tells you how other things have grown, but importantly how bauxite and alumina has declined. So I don't think it would be traumatic in a devastating way for the economy if, let's say, UC Rizal close its Kirkvine operation, which is, by the way, one of the most inefficient plants in the world. Your turn. Kirkvine is already closed. Your turn. It's a very small operation. It's 500,000 tons and it's never operating at more than about 80-90% of efficiency. You're now looking at plants in Western Australia. You showed it, Weipa, Queensland and elsewhere. Up to 2 million tons. And you have maybe 10 or 15 people operating this plant. So it's extremely efficient, very, very difficult to compete against that kind of operation. And as a result, the industry has shifted globally to Asia, Australia and India, and to some extent Africa. The Western Hemisphere, the industry no longer exists in Haiti, it no longer exists in the Dominican Republic, it has no longer exists in Suriname. Guyana was a producer of metallurgical bauxite, which was used to line calcine, calcine bauxite, which was used to line steel mill, whatever it is, in the production process. And to the extent that steel production has declined in North America, calcine bauxite demand has fallen. So there are lots of things happening. The United States is no longer a major producer of aluminium. You saw Trump saying it. Has nothing to do with the levy here. The decline in Guyana and Suriname and Haiti has nothing to do with Jamaica's levy. It's just one of those global shifts that has taken place. And I think the country, quite frankly, should think about transition, the transition that will come. Not if, but when.
Okay, so that's a good point. Could each of the panelists talk about what that transition should look like?
I think you put me in a spot. Let me think. I think I agree with you, and I think each industry will. Okay. One point I wanted to say: mature industries doesn't mean to say the industry dies. No. Mature industries could be revitalized with technology. In this case, I think there needs to be strategic planning. We need to say exactly what the future of bauxite will look like in this industry. Would it be one plant? And what that one plant will look like? And as far as I'm willing to think. And I think also, when we spoke about JBI, to a large extent, I'm going to give them a pass, because JBI never got the resources to operate effectively at one point in time. And I definitely think that's the case, okay?
I really think we should just stop issuing new mining licenses and stop waiving the levies, stop giving the concessions, and anyone that cannot survive without these will just gradually go away. But in that transition, I think we also need accelerated enforcement of the obligations for things like reclamation. I disagree entirely with Wesley that we had a very good act or regime around reclamation. It required only 6 inches of topsoil being replaced on the mined out lands, which was on a base of limestone rock. Nothing other than scrub grass can grow at 6 inches of topsoil, especially when after the first heavy rain, all that 6 inches washes down into the bowl. So yes, you could get grass, which, you know, for some time when they maintained a sort of show dairy herd in the Alcan days, you know, but that was really just for PR, sort of like how the 24/7 checkpoints and in the state of emergency PR checkpoints. I'm not catching anybody, but they're reminding the public that you will still have a state of emergency. So but at least if we put in whatever years we have left, some serious enforcement and compelling them to fulfill whatever obligations in terms of safety, in terms of land reclamation, in terms of liabilities to the third-party contractors. Because we got a hell of a scare recently with the Rusal, what do they call it? The sanctions that the US was going to put on Rusal. Jamaican companies would have borne the burden of the impact of those sanctions, because Rusal owes enormous amounts of money to mining contractors, haulage contractors. I mean, even just JPS and etc. Lease companies that they lease vehicles from, the environmental liabilities. So they would not have been the ones punished. It would have been the local economy that would have had to bear the impact of those sanctions if it resulted in Rusal closing precipitously.
Wesley, do you want to add anything?
Yes, just one comment. Over the last 70 years, we would have removed the equivalent of 560 million tons of soil. So there's no possibility that you could accumulate enough topsoil to do much. The reason why I made the point that it was a state-of-the-art piece of legislation in 1955, no longer state-of-the-art. Yeah, that was when I said it was at the time. But if you're doing even that basic, you'd have been far ahead of where we are today. In terms of the legislation, and this is one of the transition points I would recommend. Our Capital Development Fund legislation, again, 1974, state of the art. However, it had one little flaw, a fatal flaw. There's a clause in the law which gives the Minister of Finance the right to transfer in part or whole all of the levy to the consolidated fund. The fund itself should have been operating as a sovereign wealth fund to invest in the future for when bauxite disappeared. None of that money went directly. It went to finance recurrent budgetary expenditure because the law allowed the Minister of Finance to come to Parliament and ask his colleagues to approve on a quarterly basis the transfer. And then they usually say, well, if we don't do it, the JBI won't have any money to operate, because included in the act is the funding for the JBI. And so when the price goes down and the revenue goes down and there's very little, the JBI is correctly said starved because they don't get any other funding from it. So my recommendation would have been to, starting now, is to start now, amend that act. The Minister of Finance is not going to be giving up much. So amend the act, and all the funds that are coming into the Capital Development Fund, and I would include in that monies for quarry operation, because these guys are doing as bad a job as the bauxite companies, leaving all kinds of mined out areas in Clarendon and elsewhere. Attach, I don't know, maybe 10 cents per ton. I don't have a figure. We'll have to work out some number. Put that money in this sovereign wealth fund. So any mining, whether oil in the future or limestone or sand or whatever, take a portion of that for restoration and environmental degradation control for the future. Because if you don't do that, the companies are not going to do it. The agencies are not strong enough to stand up to the companies to do it. And therefore, it's not going to be done.
Okay, thanks for that. You?
Hugh, could someone
Give Hugh the mic, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Professor Wesley and Honorable Peter Bunting. Very interesting and very endorsing a lot of what you know. I take a deep breath when I listen to you make all this presentation, because to begin with, the missing link is the people, the rural people, and I'm glad we are in the University of the West Indies where it's an academic discussion. Out there, we're talking about people who are going to be disenfranchised. And Honorable Bunting, you're a legislator. You represent 62 others sitting in the parliament that have an ability to change the 1945 Mining Act. so that people begin to own more of their right as a people, particularly those who fought for it with their blood. But nobody in your position, except you, and I must congratulate you for being the only one that has spoken out and doing it here today, has had the guts to look at that, because we are at the other end looking at the repercussions and trying to put plaster Paris around the problem and still looking at the catastrophe that is ahead of us. The remaining bauxite that is rich and able to be mined is 270 million tons, metric tons, in the cockpit country, because they've left open pits in your constituency and all the others that are depleted, including St. Anne, so they're now coming into Trelawney. And if you, as you said, Wesley, looking to make efficient, we're looking at efficiency to mine out 270 million metric tons of bauxite, which is going to be finished in 15 years. And if you know, Wesley, that the sugar industry is on the decline and has literally ended, why are we in discussion about efficiency? Why aren't we in discussion about exit strategy? What is the industry? Most of the people who, as Rachel said earlier, are producing on those pits that they're mining out, are surviving and have survived historically and can go beyond the 15 to 20 years of bauxite left. So, where is the vote, Mr. Bonte, that we put to the people who are sitting in the parliament to act in our interest? A, B, be creative in looking at alternative industries, many of which are in the tertiary level, because we're talking primary mining, you know. Digging out the ore, sending it away, or converting it to alumina to be sent away to become aluminium. And the last point I want to make, because I get passionate about this, we are a small island state. How are you going to, when you dig it down, Australia will still be there, a big continent with bauxite. Where is our intellectual capacity and guts, will, to decide that the time is now to look at the alternative industries that are sustainable, and I'm not using it as a buzzword, but are in the tertiary realm that can generate more hard currency. Because when I got into this business, the dollar was 36 to 1. So the employees in the bauxite sector today are earning that percentage less in income. And Miranda told me the other day that what they are all about is securing the jobs of 900 employees.
That's not true. Miranda never told you that. I was at that meeting.
All right, wait.
I was at that meeting.
Yeah,
Hugh, can we stop? All right, let's get them answering the question. Peter, you want to respond?
Yeah.
No. Peter is going to respond, please.
You know, I think the little umpires about the jobs and what I said about the jobs is perhaps symbolic of.
This is just absolutely one-sided.
It's just symbolic of the level of thinking that we often bring to our problems. You know, I say this as taking my share of responsibility, but political leadership is often focused on the next election rather than on the next generation. And until we can shift our emphasis to the consequences on the next generation of our decision making rather than the consequences for the next election, then I don't think we will make the best decisions. We won't make optimal decisions. So the issue, for example, in terms of the jobs versus the environment, and I am, you know, I I must tell you, I myself, I've gone through a bit of a transition in my own mind because, in the beginning when I just started representational politics and I was faced with unemployment and the poverty, I thought was one of the greatest threats to the environment. I said, well, we have to make sacrifices to get jobs. But the truth of the matter is the peasant who is doing damage to the environment just to live hand to mouth is relatively inefficient at it, at doing damage to the environment. The big multinationals are, very efficient, and at the scale of the damage that they do is enormous relative. So my own view has really shifted in the direction of the environment as opposed to getting some jobs created. And as I said, oftentimes these jobs are really low-paying jobs. There are no better paying jobs than in a BPO sector. So if you're just going for the wages, at least get it in a sector that's relatively benign in terms of its environmental impact. So, I understand that the Noranda has been predictably mobilizing, using their funds, mobilizing their workers. They've created this narrative that it's either we mine in the bauxite in the cockpit country or you'll all lose your jobs, which is a false narrative. But in any event, what is 900 jobs? What is 900 jobs in the scheme of things, in terms of the history? 900 low-paying jobs can be created by building one 40,000 square foot building and putting a BPO in. That is it. And that will have, relatively benign impact on the environment. So, that argument doesn't scare me. But I really think I sent out a WhatsApp earlier after the movie finished, and I want to congratulate you on it, on the documentary. And I know what went into it because I know the long day you spent in central Manchester, and maybe out of 12 hours there, we got like 1 minute of the documentary. When I extrapolate that to how you got these 2 hours, I can understand a 14-year undertaking. But I really sent a WhatsApp to some of my colleagues as soon as it finished, and really strongly suggesting that they find a way to watch it, because sometimes we need to step back from the sort of toxic cut and thrust that represents our politics today, and the social media trolling and the manipulation by the PR persons, and just reflect on some of these things and reflect on it in a more generational sense and help us to make the right decisions.
I think that the point he was trying to make is that there's an ingrained political culture and structure in place. And if that can't be changed, or seemingly can't be changed, then what actions can we take? And I would say that one of the actions we can take is for the next election, or anyone who's going to be running for whatever they're going to be running, is that they must take a stand. In other words, they must be forced to say what their position is on mining across Jamaica, including special mining East 173, the boundary of cockpit country, the protected area. They have to give a rational exit plan and those sorts of things, because it'll just continue business as usual. They come, they want the money, you stand up and say what you say, Ryan Craig stand up and say what he say, and the money still goes. Nothing changes. So if the political culture, for all the reasons you've given, is not going to change, we have to force politicians to publicly, and not that two-faced nonsense that certain people have been doing recently, but they have to stand up and say, okay, if you want my vote, here's the following. It's a different form of buying votes. Anyway, thank you very much for participating. Thank you, audience. I know it's been a very long day. I guess
ask one question?
Well, I guess Wendy Lee's in the back and she'll do the last one. All right, Wendy, what?
Thank you. I just... Okay, when I turn it again, but that's not the question. I just have to say, I'm astonished at the alienation of the political leadership. Not you, Mr. Bunting, but in general. It has been a lack of political will, clearly, that makes those government agencies not even want to come here today, not want to fund research, not want to know the results of the research. And I just can't understand that they seem to be operating as a little, as Kingston and the economy. When the lack of respect for the actual urban, the rural people of Jamaica and their livelihoods, what he was talking about. There are hundreds and thousands. There are so many thousands of people that have been living sustainably. Agriculture, feeding this country, and 50, 60 years have destroyed that. And we're still talking about more bauxite mining? No, it has to stop. It really has to stop. And I do not want to hear the word balance. You cannot balance the whole entire livelihood, history, culture, social life of one whole set of people that happen to be in the areas that are targeted for mining against the people driving the big trucks, the JBI employees, the people who are sucking the money out of this industry. You cannot call it balance. I don't care what you know, and you make the environmentalists out to be, fringe lunatics. We are seeing with our own eyes what Esther has shown you. This is the destruction of the lifeblood and the future of our island, and it has got to stop. We need to have a new direction.
Okay, so those are the last words. Thank you again to the panelists, the previous panelists, everyone who's here. And Rochelle is just going to say a quick vote of thanks.
Thank you everybody for coming. Thank you, Esther. I can't believe how well this thing turned out today. The film was wonderful and the discussion after was so informative and educational. And what I'm taking from it is that cockpit country and the mining in cockpit country and the aluminum industry is not just a concern of the people who live in cockpit country, but all of us. And it is something that we need to take very seriously and be active about. Please leave your email address. We have a register out there. If you would, perhaps Esther can direct us on, if we want to help make our voices heard and how we can get involved if we want to in this movement. I didn't acknowledge earlier, but I do want to say now thank you to the Department of History and Archaeology and Karimat, who very generously collaborated on this venture with Literatures in English. And a big thank you to the Faculty of Medical Sciences, the Dean, Dr. Tomlin Paul, who allowed us to use this theater at a very minimal cost. Thank you very much for coming.